Hi, and welcome to this webisode, Mr. Wilson Teaches, Making a Plaster Mask. To create a plaster mask, you have to start by getting all your materials you're going to need out and ready. The first one being the plaster mask form, which is made of a plastic and easily pops off when you're finished. Plaster wrap, and plaster wrap is basically just a fabric that has plaster embedded in it, and it is activated by the water, which creates a chemical reaction to harden. You're also going to need masking tape, scissors, and water, which you'll keep in a bucket right next to your desk. It's also really important to make sure that you have your area set up so that it doesn't get too messy, and I do that by putting out a plastic bag that keeps the plaster from getting all over the table, and it makes for a very easy cleanup. The first step you're going to do is take your plaster tape and you're going to write your name onto it. And the reason we do this is so that we know whose is whose, because all these will look the same. So you write your name, pull off the tape, and stick that right onto the back of the mask. And we put it on the back of the mask, that way it doesn't mess up any of the plaster going onto the form itself. When you get yourself set up with your name, you're going to be given plaster wrap. And the plaster wrap can be cut to any size you like. I usually stick with smaller ones and sort of varying lengths, so some will be long, some will be short. And you're going to cut those into strips. And the reason we're doing them as strips is because you want to make sure you're going to be able to cover each of the features of the face, and by doing varying sizes you're going to be able to get into some of the areas better, like the nose and the eye. And this part I realize isn't the most exciting, but it is necessary, and it's best to have all of your pieces cut up before you start to wet them and put them on the mask, because once the plaster starts to wet, it starts to set. And the problem, if you were to begin doing it and then have to stop and cut more, is your plaster wrap that you haven't cut could have already gotten wet and set up, or you might not have enough time to add on the rest of the plaster to the mask and have a nice fade, which I'll show you once we start doing this. So you're going to cut up your plaster wrap. You can see I've already cut up a bunch here so that I can show you in a faster fashion. I'm going to cut up a bunch of plaster, set aside my other plaster so I don't get it wet, and you're going to begin putting the plaster onto the mask. To put the plaster on the mask, you take a strip, and notice I'm using both hands, set it into the water, and then take my finger and smush through the plaster so that it's filling all those holes. And you take the plaster, set it onto the mask, and rub it into it. The more you rub, the better of a fade you're going to get, which I mentioned earlier, and you're going to start to lose all the little pockets that are in the fabric. And I know it's very hard to see from there and you probably can't make out the actual holes, but I'm going through and smoothing out all those areas. And I'm going to take my next plaster strip, dip it in the water, go through and smudge the plaster into it, and the next one I'm going to lay is going to be crisscrossed. And the reason we do a crisscross is it's going to create a stronger piece by overlapping the plaster. And if you were to do it all the same way, it would create areas that could break very easily. So there's a lot more strength if you're overlapping. And usually about 3 layers is good. If you get too many, you're going to end up having a really heavy mask and it won't be able to hang properly. And if you don't get enough, it's going to be very weak and you won't be able to paint it. It's important too that you don't lose the features on the mask. So see, I'm taking my fingers, pressing them into the eye, fading it over the nose, going through and making sure that all those features still stand out and the mask is smooth. And depending on which feature you're on, so I'm going to use a smaller one now that I'm working towards the nose. And you're going to choose your size depending on what you need it for. You can also overlap your mask form a little bit, so I'm going to have it fade onto the edges, and this is something that you're going to trim up later, so you don't have to worry about going outside of the area. And I'll hold this up, not that you'll be able to see very well. You can see the plaster is actually fading onto the rim here. That's good, so that when I pop it, I can cut it right off. It's better to have too much than not enough on this area, or else you'll have a gap and it'll look like there's a chip that's out of your face. It's also possible to do plaster wrap on top of any sort of form. So if I didn't have this plaster form, I could take newspaper, wad it up, create a face, or put it on top of another material, and it would do the same thing. It's just convenient to have this face mold because we're going for a face. Let's see, I'm taking it, smudging it, layering it, and fading it. And like I said, you want about 3 layers, and you can usually tell if you don't have enough layers just by looking at it. So if you can see through and actually see the plastic or the shine of the mask, that means you don't have enough. So I would do this until the whole thing is covered, and it takes about 24 hours to completely dry up so that you're able to paint it. So once you're done, remember your name has to be on the back, you're going to set it aside so that it can finish. There are also ways to add on different features. So let's say you wanted to add something onto the form that's not already there, like a horn. And here's an example of one that has added features, so a horn on both sides. The way to do that is to take paper towel and tape and make the form that you want it to look like. So if you wanted to make a horn, start on the paper towel, roll it up, and tape it into the style that you want it. And the reason I tape it is because as soon as this paper towel gets wet, it's going to melt. So this tape is going to make it a lot stronger. So I'm shaping it into the horn. And you can make any shape really. Sometimes you don't even need the paper towel. So let's say I wanted to add a beard, facial hair, maybe a mustache on the face. I can just take plaster wrap and add on extra there. So I'm getting the horn shape, and then I'm going to cut a flat surface for me to stick to the actual piece. There's my horn. And I'm going to place it on top of the plaster that I already used. And then you really just plaster it onto itself. And what happens is this plaster almost acts as an adhesive. And as I put on the plaster, it's going to bond with the wet plaster I already have and start to hold it in place. And then you can sort of push and warp it around like you want. So I'm slowly gluing it to itself, and then I would plaster all the way around so that it would dry too. Sometimes you can get away with a little less layers, but you want to make sure that you do enough that it sticks, but not enough so that it falls down. And like I said before, if you wanted to add something like a beard, let's say that I don't want to add paper towel, you can take the plaster wrap and actually crumple it up. Let's say I want to make this a new mustache. I'm going to twist it and take that and go right over the lip. And I know you can't see from the video here, but what I'm doing is I'm pinching this up in the spot so that it actually creates a mustache line. And then I would go over with the plaster to seal it to it. So there's a lot you can do with it, and sort of the more you work with it, the better you get with it. After you're finished, like I said, it takes about 24 hours to cure. You're going to take the piece, and it's really easy to pop. So you put your hand on top of the mask, flip it over, take your form and pinch, and pop it open. And then you're going to go around each of the sides and trim off all the extra so that you get a nice finish that will cling to the wall. And after that, you're ready for paint. So it's pretty simple in terms of the project itself. Remember, cleanup is very important. You should have plastic down that you're going to crumple up and then throw out. The water that you're using cannot go down the sink. So if this still has plaster in it, you put it in the sink, it hardens, and then it creates a big clog that you can't get rid of. So it's best to let the water set almost the full day as well, and then either take a sponge or lightly pour out the water in it and throw out the extra plaster that's in the bottom. Other than that,